we got a bunch of people on. Hello, everyone. All right, I'm gonna shut the door and then we're gonna get started. So if folks want to just type in the chat box who's here from your program, that'd be great, so that I know who's here with us. I expected there might be a few people, so I muted people when they first come on. I think because the questions will be probably really specific to the fund, that if folks can write their questions in so that I can organize answering them in a way that makes sense as we go, that would be awesome. So does anybody have problems seeing their chat box? If so, unmute yourself now so that you can tell me. Okay, I'm gonna send you all a message and say hello. Great, awesome. Hi, Amy. Hi, Catalina. Great. Hi, Jenny. So I'm gonna just sort of dive right in because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for people's questions and we have time to go over everything we want to cover on the fund application. And so feel free to be typing in, continue with the introductions and be typing in questions as you think of them, and then I'm going to go through the chat box after we go over the basics of the fund to make sure that everybody's questions get answered. So as a sort of basic introduction, this is the fund, sometimes called the VOCA Fund, VOCA. It stands for the Victims of Crime Act. That's where the money comes from. This is funding that is national, filtered through the State Department of Health and Human Services, that is available to meet the immediate needs of victims and survivors of trafficking, to meet their basic needs. It was previously housed at the Portland Police Department. This is the first year that Mikasa is the coordinator of this fund. So all of this process is really quite new. It's not even a year old that we've been doing this. So bear with us as over time we'll come out with new versions of applications and processes will continue to tweak and change a little bit. And we'll continue to keep you guys updated and I'll show you how to find that out. That's just a little bit of the background of where this fund came from. So we're going to start by looking at where we can find the information, like where you can find the application for the fund. So if you go to mainsten.org, which is the website that I'm on right now, so that's mainsten, mainesten.org, and you go to, let's see, I have to make this full screen to make this work. You go to support, and then you go to Survivor Support Fund. It'll take you to this page. This is some information about the Survivor Fund, and if you're ever working with people who want to donate to that fund, they can do that here. What's great is that if they donate to the fund, that money can be used in a different way than the rest of the VOCA fund can be, because it's not restricted by the requirements of the funder. So sometimes we get requests for things that can't be covered, like, I don't know, educational classes or gym memberships or something like that. So what's cool about this is that it's possible that that money could be used to support things that wouldn't normally be able to be covered. Scroll down a little bit more. You'll see here is some more information about the fund. So this is a way to get to the application. So you can click on the application here and it'll open in a new web page, and I'll show you that. So we're going to come back to this in a minute, but there's a copy of the fund. If you're ever not sure if the application you're using is the most up-to-date, I always recommend you come here and click there, because I'm always going to make sure that the fund linked, the application linked in the click here button is the most recent. Then there's information here about how you can contact people for help if you want to fill out an application, but you're not someone who's actually a qualified service provider. And then this little piece is about recognizing whether or not there's money available. So far we've been really lucky. We have never turned this to a different color. There's always been enough money available that people can go ahead and make purchases, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But sometimes it might be that we're low on funds and we need people to check in before they make purchases. So if that's going to happen, you can come here and tell. This will say yellow. There'll be a yellow light bulb here, and that means don't buy anything that you want to be reimbursed for until you check in with us. And of course, if it's red, it means we're out of money altogether. And we're not going to be able to pay anything out because the fund is empty. So if this ever changes, hopefully all of you will get probably multiple important ranked emails from me that say that that this funding has changed and that it's no longer enough money for you to just buy things as you go. All right, now we're going to go over, switch my screen share here. Okay, I'm going to stop that share. All right. Are there any questions so far about that piece, about the website and accessing that information, or knowing when it's green, yellow, or red? Okay, not seeing any. So let's keep going. So this is the application for the fund. We open it up, start scrolling down. It starts with talking about the fund purpose. So like I said, it's here to meet the immediate emotional, psychological, and physical health and safety needs of victims of trafficking and survivors when other funds are unavailable or unable to do so. The rest of this document, which is about 10 pages long, is really seeking to break down what that sentence means and to find ways of verifying that so that we can show funders we did that thing. So every sort of piece of this is going to be broken out and defined, but really the fund purpose, that first sentence, is the thing that you can always reflect back on to when you're thinking about whether or not things meet the need. So it breaks down who can apply for the fund, and we're going to be updating this a little bit. We want to make sure that if new people are applying that have never applied before, we're checking in with them about that, and there'll be language that gets added in the next draft specifically about that. Not new individual people, but new agencies and programs. So there's a little bit of information. This says that law enforcement officers should only be, if they contact someone who has a need, they should be referring to service providers, not filling out applications themselves unless it's an emergency. And of course, it should always be with the consent of the victim or survivor. And if you're not an eligible service provider, you can contact sexual assault and domestic violence programs to help. So eligibility, in order for someone, a recipient is what we call them. The recipient is the person who actually receives whatever the thing is that you're asking for funding for. So if it's rent, the person who actually is getting their rent paid for is the recipient. The recipient of the funds has to be a victim or survivor of human trafficking in Maine, and that's going to be defined later on as any legal definition of trafficking, either federal or state, and it spells them out and then links to the laws in a bit. So there's no requirement that they report to law enforcement. There's no dollar limit per recipient. So each recipient may access each item on the pre-approved needs list one time per year. So what that means is, as we go through and look at the pre-approved needs list, which we'll skip to it real quick. Okay, so this is the pre-approved needs list. So let's say one person named Shelly wants to apply for taxi money. She can be pre-approved for taxi money if she otherwise qualifies, but she can only be pre-approved for taxi money one time per year. It's kind of a funny example because taxi is something that we would almost definitely reapprove you for, but something like rent, it might be more of a conversation. So if someone already gets their first, last, and security paid for, then in the same calendar year, the same individual person can't be pre-approved for that same need again. So let's see, let's go back up to where that is. But you can still reach out to MICASA and ask for special approval for that. So if that happens, you would just email htfund@micasa.org, which is where all of the applications go, and any questions about the fund can be directed. And then me or someone else at the office would have a conversation about that, and then if you were approved to apply again, they would give you a special approval form. So to be a recipient who's eligible, you have to be a victim of a qualifying crime. It has to be the first time that you are using the fund in that calendar year for that need. And let's see, so when we think about the need, we're thinking about what has to be the case for that need for that individual. So if I'm a victim of trafficking, that need must be connected to my victimization. It has to be an immediate need, and it has to not be able to be funded through other sources. And so we'll look at that again in a minute. All right, this is so the first 6 pages of this document are all informational. So I don't want any of this back when you're filling out the application. So this page, the first 6 are just for your records, for you to have background information about the fund. So this is a step-by-step guide for you to make sure that you're sort of going through the process of being reimbursed and making sure that you've gone through each of the steps. So you can use this if you want to, if it's helpful, or not if you don't. We don't need this back. But explains the 3 ways people can be reimbursed. So, or that needs can be paid for. It explains the 3 ways needs can be paid for. So the first way needs can be paid for, if we look under step 2, is that service providers can pay the cost directly for approved purchases and submit for reimbursement from Mi Casa. So there's a list in a minute of pre-approved things that are already qualified, as long as the person answers yes to the questions correctly, which we'll look at in a second. Service providers can pay the cost directly for the approved purchase and then submit to reimbursement. And then here's some instructions on how to do that. You'll send the papers together that we'll look at in a second with a receipt, and then we would send the money back to you. The second option, option B, is service providers who are unable to pay the cost directly can contact the sexual assault program or domestic violence program to help them make those payments. So that is based on the fact that sexual assault and domestic violence programs are 24-hour programs who often have access to ways to purchase things after hours. So in those cases, the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Center would be responsible for completing the screening application, and then just like in option A, sending that information to Mi Casa for reimbursement. C, the third option, service providers can request Mi Casa pay for needs directly to vendors. So this option is only available for needs that can be paid for by check or credit card. Of course, like for instance, if you want to buy clothes at Walmart, we can't pay for that directly because, you know, we can't. Walmart won't let us just like sort of call them and give them a credit card number on the phone. Someone has to be there to pay for it directly. Some things though, like rent or payment for an inpatient mental health treatment program, we could send a check and there's a place later for you to indicate what would be on the memo line. And we need some proof that the place that it's going to is correct and all that stuff. But so this is available for some types of needs, and that it'll take up to 2 weeks for us to process them. It's usually done in a little bit less time than that, but we want to make sure that we give ourselves that full 2 weeks because sometimes some of the staff may be out. We're not a 24-hour program. We don't do direct services. We're not always available. Certain people have to sign the checks, all that stuff. So we may take up to 2 weeks to process these applications. And if it needs to be paid for more quickly, then use options 1 or 2. So options 1, you pay for it yourself and get reimbursed. Option 2, you connect with another service provider, usually DV or SA program, to see if they can pay for it up front for you. All right, I'm gonna check real quick and see if there's any questions so far. Any questions about this piece? In the chat. Okay, not seeing any so far. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. So this is a flow chart, and I think I need to sort of zoom out a little bit here. Let's see if I can do that. 75%, yeah. So here's a flow chart that we made to sort of help think through the process. Use it if it's helpful, don't use it if it's not, but it's just sort of a walkthrough of the steps to filling out the application. So is the recipient eligible? Again, the recipient is the person who is receiving the benefit from the fund, right? So if they're eligible, and the questions about whether or not they're eligible is this person a victim of a qualifying crime? So if they are, then the answer is yes, right? If the answer is no, you can call Mi Casa with questions, but if they're not a victim of human trafficking or sex trafficking according to Maine law, then they won't be eligible for the fund. Is the need that they're asking for directly related to their victimization? Again, if it's no, you can call us to talk about that and just make sure that we're thinking of it in the same way, but we're not going to be able to fund it if it's really not connected, right? So let's say it's yes, then we're going to ask ourselves, is the need immediate? So this goes again back to that main first sentence of what the VOCA fund can be used for. So if it's not an immediate need, it won't be able to be covered here. You can call Mi Casa to talk about that and to say, like, I'm thinking of this as an immediate need because this person needs substance use disorder treatment to live or for their recovery, but it's not food. They don't need it today, right? Or they need rent, but they don't need it like tomorrow, they need it in the next month. So we can help you sort of work through some of those questions and talk through the need and assess whether or not we would consider that immediate. But essentially, if it's not an immediate need, then it can't be covered. So that next question is the need otherwise funded? There's a list below of things that we want you to acknowledge that you've tried to find funding for, but essentially we want you to sort of be putting on your hat as a service provider and thinking about resources in your community and whether or not they would meet this need. They could meet this need for this person safely and in the appropriate time frame. So for example, if you're looking for assistance, or if the survivor is looking for assistance with medical care, we would hope that you would have applied for free care through the hospital first, that you would have be in the process of applying for main care, and if that person already has main care, that we would only be paying for what main care couldn't cover, or that they had already, tried to get that service at a free clinic, right? So that you had sort of been looking around at community options and saying, what's available for medical care? How can we serve this person's need using what already exists? And the reason for that is, one, because it's a requirement of the fund, but also because we want this money to be meeting needs that could not otherwise be met, right? That are like gaps in the system. So if there's another program that would serve this person, we want them to use that program first and then come for other needs that can't be met in other places. So another example of this is like daycare. If what you're requesting is childcare costs, there are programs through some childcare centers and through the state that people can apply for to get those costs reduced. So we would expect people to go through that process first and then come back. There are some examples of times when things can be covered by other programs, but not in a time frame that works for people. So an example of this is general assistance. Maybe general assistance technically pays for rental assistance, but they need it so quickly, and general assistance can't turn around the check in the amount of time that they need. Or they've already applied for general assistance and they didn't follow the rules set up by general assistance, so they actually can't go back, even though general assistance technically covers the thing you're asking for. Then that would count as not being otherwise funded in the appropriate time frame or safely. Another example of this is shelter. So if you're looking to put someone up in a hotel room, we ask that you are thinking about all the other shelter options first, right? So like assessing community shelter, domestic violence shelters, the trafficking safe house, all of these options. So if there is technically space at the Florence house, then the person could go there, but they know that someone else who's been trafficked by the same person is going there and they can't go. It's not safe for them. Then we would consider that to be something that cannot be paid for in another way safely, right? So those are just some of the ways we think about that, and I'm always happy to talk through that with people. But if something is otherwise funded, then it can't be approved. And so as long as you're sort of going through that process and we ask you to check and sign to acknowledge that you've done that, it can be funded through the MOCA. So let's say it's not otherwise funded and we go back down here to approval. So is the need pre-approved? So we'll look at this in a second, but essentially the things listed here under need on the left-hand column are all pre-approved items. So these are things that are on a pre-approved needs list. And sometimes if you email me with questions and I say like, is this pre-approved? This is what I'm talking about. Is it listed here in this left-hand column? There's a good amount of stuff listed there, and we're going to go through them one by one. But that's sort of what that's referring to. So is it pre-approved? If the answer is no, then you have to call for pre-approval. So there are some things, like someone just today, or maybe it was yesterday, called asking about toiletries, which is a great example of something that we frankly just forgot when we were making the application, personal hygiene items. But because it's not on the list, technically that person did the right thing by calling and checking in first before they bought that to make sure that we would be able to reimburse for it. Because there are some things that aren't listed that we actually can't cover. Like we can't pay debts, we can't pay criminal court fees, we can't buy alcohol, cigarettes. There's a host of things that we are never going to be able to cover. And so if it's not on this list, you need to check with us first. The other part of it that's not listed here is it has to be, the thing you're asking for has to be within the pre-approved limit, which we'll look at in a second. And then the question of how you're paying for it. So can your agency pay up front and invoice Mi Casa? And then if not, call one of these folks or request Mi Casa pay directly. All right, we're headed to the pre-approved needs. So this is the list of all of the things that are Pre-approved, so if the person qualifies for the fund, these things can be approved for an individual person one time per year, per need. So bus pass, so you can see it's broken down by type of needs. So transportation, bus passes, rideshare apps, taxi, gas, car repair, car fees, airfare. You'll see that in the notes section, so there's the pre-approved limit, which tells you how many of them you can buy, right? So how much money you can spend on that, or how many of them if it's not a dollar limit. It might say like one way, or it's what can be covered, just car registration and tax, or 1 month of insurance payments. That varies from person to person, so there's not a dollar amount attached. In the notes is anything else that you should know when purchasing that item, right? Or when thinking about that item. This is the section that will be updated in the next application because there's a lot more sort of notes that will be helpful for you to reference that says something we want you to think about as you're thinking about buying this item. So keep reflecting back on this, even if you've used the fund for a while. When a new application comes out, keep checking back in the notes. For example, rideshare app, you can use an Uber gift card. So those are great because you can buy them online, send them to the person's email address, like the survivor you're working with email address, and it's a $50 maximum on that. So it's really like low barrier, pretty simple, and because it can only be used for Uber, it's fine for us to have the receipts from that. Let's see. And then for like car fees, agencies have to certify and keep proof in their records that the recipient has a valid driver's license, that the car is registered to the recipient, inspected and insured. So part of this is because the government doesn't want us paying for registration and tax for stolen cars, right? So you have to make sure that the car is owned by the person who you're working with, and then keep those records in case one day we're ever audited or you're ever audited. So you have to have those records to back that up. We don't want it. We don't want any survivor information, any confidential information, but you need to be able to keep that. Airfare, you have to demonstrate that the cheapest flight was chosen. You can do that by just, when you go to search for flights, if you say like, I want to go Boston to Chicago, look for the one you picked and like get other ones near it around the same time and show what the range of prices are. You can literally just print a PDF, the web page, to prove that there were other more expensive flights and that you picked the cheapest one. But again, that's a $300 maximum. So if you wanted to spend more than that, which you might need to go to Chicago, depending on when you go, you would need to contact htfund@micasa.org and request to spend more money and just write a couple sentences about why. All right, so let's go to shelter. Shelter's the next sort of big category. This covers rent, and then that includes for a new apartment, security first and last month's rent all together, which can end up being like, a chunk of change depending on where you are, several $1,000s. Or if you have an existing apartment, then 1 month's rent is included. And so we consider that sort of one need. Electric bill, heat bill, hotel. If folks are going to be using hotels, we ask that they make ongoing safety plans with that individual. We don't want people just dropping people off at hotels and then leaving them there for the weekend. If you are the one who is being a conduit for the funds to put that person in a hotel room, it's your role to make sure you have a safety plan, that when someone's going to be following up with that person has the things they need to be there for the amount of time that they're there, all those things. So we ask that you acknowledge that later on in the application. The other thing is for hotels, we can only pay the federal rate for hotel rooms. And this gsa.gov is a website. You go to it, you type in the city you live in, the city that you're looking for hoteling in, and the month, and then it will tell you what the limit is for hotel rooms during that time in that area. And that's all that you can spend. And unfortunately, because this is again, a grant requirement, we're not able to waive this. This has to be the case for the hotel you choose. All right, heading down to medical. So there's a bunch of medical needs, prescription drugs, medical equipment, over-the-counter medicine, medication-assisted treatment, inpatient substance use disorder treatment, partial inpatient substance use disorder treatment, outpatient mental health treatment and inpatient, and partial programs. So a lot of stuff that's pre-covered here. If you don't see what you're looking for on this list, again, you can always email htfund@micasa.org to ask if you can have it covered. And then other basic needs, so groceries and food. For the groceries, food, it's a $100 maximum, which we know if people really have none is sometimes not enough. So again, if not enough, reach out to us. If you use a grocery food gift card, which we know is a preference for a lot of people, the gift card has to be food only. So it can't allow purchase of alcohol or cigarettes. And so Hannaford has a card like this. And what we ask is that if you're going to buy a gift card like that to give to someone, that what we need is to prove it, we need a picture of the gift card that includes the front where it says not to be used on alcohol or cigarettes, and the back, which has the number with the receipt. So the receipt has the gift card number on it, and we're looking to match the gift card receipt number from the receipt to the gift card itself with the front image. So we want sort of all three of those pieces together to prove that the grocery gift card you bought was really just for food. For hot food, this can pay up to 3 meals a day for 3 days. And again, this has to follow the federal rates at gsa.gov, just like hotels do. So it's by city, by time of year. There'll be prices for how much you can spend on breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So you just, as long as you're within that federal per diem limit, then you're fine, and just keep your receipts from all of that. Clothes, $150 maximum, so we're just looking for regular receipts there. Outerwear, cell phone, I get questions about this sometimes. So there's a $50 maximum for phone hardware plus 1 month phone plan or equivalent minutes. Sometimes people are like, I don't really know what equivalent minutes are. I usually go for about $50, I think is generally the equivalent minutes. If you need more for some reason, let me know, but consider $50 worth of minutes to be pre-approved if somebody's using a minute plan. And then furniture, so this is some limits for some of the items that we know people can get. Those are the ones we put on there even though we know people use other furniture than that, because those are two things that are frequently infested with bed bugs. So things like dining room tables, kitchen tables, whatever, coffee tables, side tables. We imagine people would have more luck getting at a Salvation Army or getting donated or from Goodwill or something. So not to say they can't be covered, but that we would just ask that you do a special approval for those items, whereas beds and couches we know are often hard to get reliably without bed bugs. Childcare costs, so $1,000 maximum for up to 1 month. And so we have had questions about this before where the person who's doing the childcare is not like a daycare center. We can still pay for that, but we need something written down that says, you know, the person who's doing the childcare needs to write something saying, I'm providing childcare costs. You still need a receipt for paying them. They still have to sign it. The receipt should say how much you're paying them for. If you have a contract with them, even better. It doesn't have to be a daycare agency, but we need to have some paper trail that you paid for childcare. Paperwork replacement costs. So basically all of the standard paperwork replacement costs can be covered. We've also had questions about name changes. We've approved those, so feel free to email us about if you have any of those. Like I said before, we just can't pay for court fees, criminal charges, right? So like if somebody has to take a driving course because they got a DUI, we can't pay for that, you know? So anything that's sort of attached to a criminal punishment, we won't be able to cover, but other things, most other administrative court fees like that we can. And then housewares, which, I mean, dishes, bedding, kitchenware, towels, really, if it's something in your house that you use and need, it's like an everyday item, it's probably fine to just consider housewares like stuff you keep in your house that average people, right, you know, need. Okay. Any questions about what is pre-approved here? Back to my chair. All right. Not seeing any. Great. Feel free to keep typing in questions and I'll keep popping back in here, but I will keep going then. So again, like I said before, the first 6 pages are all informational. So these first 6 pages we just looked at, all of this, you just sort of keep it for your own records. You don't even need to print it out after the first time, just like for you to look at and reflect on. And then starting on page 7 is when the actual application begins. So this is the part that we actually want you to fill out and send back to us. So you'll see here there's a little error, which is this should say name of service provider applicant, and then this should say like agency name, and the second service provider should say agency name. So that's going to be fixed soon. But in the meantime, just put your name in one of these and your agency name in the other. You can choose which one. You're going to write the date of the application. So preferably, we love when that date is actually the date you send it to me. But if it's not, it's fine. It just helps us keep track of like how long it takes us to turn around applications when that happens. A phone number, which is a place for me to be able to contact the service provider if I have questions. And then the service provider's address. So keep all that on there. And then you're going to check a box to say that you are an eligible service provider. So you're going to check whichever one of these applies to you. Do you work at a sexual assault center, a domestic violence center, another victim service program connected to an anti-trafficking MDT? And then you'll see there's some sort of like cheeky redirects. I'm a police officer and I am unable to reach any of the above providers, or I'm none of these things and I will call a sexual assault center or a domestic violence center for help. So we're trying to sort of route people to the place where we want them to go in these questions. Then we're going to capture some demographic information. Here's the recipient info. So we're asking you to create a recipient ID. So the example here, Jane Doe, we're pulling the J from Jane, the D from Doe, and then the birthday, so 9/25. So you'll notice here it's not 09/25, and the reason why we do that is because everybody's will show up a little bit differently if we do that. So we ask that you take out any extra zeros. It just makes my life easier, because if you don't, then I just have to go back and change it on the application and on our paperwork and on our forms, so that it's always showing up individually, so we know if people are using the fund for multiple places. So example again, like if someone's birthday was May 2nd, not, don't do JB0502, do JB52, and then we'll know what that stands for. Race and ethnicity, age, gender, so just filling all of that out, and then checking how the recipient is eligible. So like we said before, has to be a victim of a qualifying crime. So here's the sort of definitions. And the important part here is that it asks for you to check all that apply. So if you're checking human trafficking federal, then I can guarantee you that that person is also a victim of one of the top 2 crimes. And so my hope is that you're sort of looking through each one of those and collecting as many of them as apply, because it helps us to have data about what kind of people we're serving when you fill this part out completely. So again, sex trafficking it may not be that this rises to the federal definition, but if it does, then we want you to check both. And sometimes people have experienced all 3, and so check all 3. And again, recipient not eligible is like a fake one. You can't really check that, because then you wouldn't be filling out the application, or you shouldn't be sending it to me. So this is the second page. We call this sort of the main application, these 2 pages. This is sort of the back of it if you print it double-sided. The total cost of the need. So this is how much the needs, this is the total amount that you're requesting. So you're like, you've bought something, or you are ready for us to pay for something directly, or for you to request us to pay for something directly. Maybe you have 3 items, maybe you have 1 item, maybe you have 10 items, but all together, how much are they going to cost? So we want you to add that up. And this helps us make sure that we aren't missing a page, that we haven't lost one of your receipts or one of your sheets, so we can make sure that everything together adds up to the amount that we're sending out. And then this question, how many need request forms are attached? So this next part is a need request form, and you're going to do 1 for each individual separate need. So you may have 1 attached. You always are going to have at least 1 attached, right? Because you're applying for some need. But you might have 2, you might have 3, you might have 4, you might have 5. So we want you to tell us how many need forms are attached. And then you're signing your name and printing to say that you understand that you did your best to tell the truth on this form, so that we know that you are sticking with the information you gave us, so that we are in the clear. All right, so the need request form. This is where a lot of the information about the individual thing you're asking for is. The first thing I'll draw your attention to is this part up here where it says need. It's sort of hidden, and I'm going to make it bigger on the next one because some people miss it. This is where you're going to write something like taxi, or rent, or 1 month of medication assisted treatment, or clothes, or outerwear, or something. Here you're going to write the cost for that need. So this is different from the amount above because it's just the cost for whatever you're asking for. So let's say this is for clothes. So you're going to write clothes here. The cost for the need is going to be, let's say, $50. And then you're going to check one of these boxes. Is this need directly related to their victimization? Yes. If the answer is no, then it does not qualify, and you should stop where you are. Is it an immediate need? Yes or no. Again, if it doesn't, if no, then it doesn't qualify. Is this need otherwise funded? So you're checking here to acknowledge that you have explored all these other options. So personal resources or insurance, this is our way of saying this person can't pay for this themselves, right? An emergency because they don't have money for it. You're clicking that. Main care, if main care can pay for it in the time frame needed, then you should be using that. If not, click here. General assistance, the same thing. So you're going through each one. Main victims compensation, again, it can be that main victims compensation technically pays for it, but that this person actually needs therapy like next week, and that main victims compensation takes 3 months. And so it's not going to meet the need in the appropriate time frame. So keep going, right? This is for, TDAP is only for certain programs, and EWAP is only for federal witnesses. So, just going through, making sure that these things don't fit. And so the biggest one here is to other community funds and programs, because there could be tons of stuff in your community that might help people get their needs met. So there could be a local church that donates clothes to people with kids, right? So sort of asking you to put your creative thinking hat on and try to see what else can be covered by other programs. And you do your due diligence to make sure that's the case. And when you said you can't find something that will cover it in the time frame needed or safely, then you check that box. If you're requesting hoteling money, then you need to also check these. So you need to acknowledge that shelter is not available, safe house isn't available, domestic violence shelters aren't available, or a home or family friend, again, are either not safe or not available. All right, let's keep going. So the second page of this is the back of the need request form. You're going to say, is this pre-approved? So the answer has to be either yes, it is, or no, but MICASA has approved this need specifically. And if that's the case, then what we'll usually do is send you a special approval form, is what it's called, special approval, and that will indicate like, it's not a pre-approved need, but Jess approved it for this reason, and there'll be like a sentence that explains why. So the same with this next question, is it within the pre-approved limit? So again, let's say rent, the pre-approved limit is 1 month for ongoing apartments, but you're actually looking for 2 months. So you're going to say, is it within the pre-approved limit? If you're asking for 2 months, the answer is no. But if you reached out to htfund@micasa.org, maybe you already got approved, you have a special approval form, and then you can say no, but MICASA approved spending more than listed. Then the last question is this, the first time the recipients use this fund to meet this need during this calendar year. So this is partly has a tricky component, which is you need to make sure you ask the person this because they could be using multiple service providers to apply for the fund. So we're both asking you to keep your own internal records and reflect on that, but we're also asking you to ask the recipient, have you used this fund before? Have you used the MICASA fund or the victim fund or whatever you want to call it to apply for this money? They might not know, in which case you can always ask, but at least we want you to have the conversation. So again, if they've already used it and they need it again, that's fine. You can ask us some examples of situations that have come up that we've paid for things more than once, like rent. Somebody, we did first, last, and security. They started working. They were doing great. A couple months later, the trafficker showed up at their job. They had to leave. So now they're not able to work to pay their rent money anymore. So they're asking for rent money again. Perfectly reasonable, fits in with the purpose of the fund, makes sense, but it's just going to be a case-by-case basis because we want to make sure that we're giving access to the fund equitably and that we have enough money to pay for those things to happen over and over again. So then we get down to the payment options. So how is the payment actually going to be made? So there's two options. The one option is you paid for the need already and the receipt's attached, and then we're going to mail you a check. So you'll just check that box, make sure that there are receipts. It's my job to make sure the numbers all match up, and then tell us where to send it. Or the second option is that we're asking for MICASA to pay it directly. So if that's the case, there's sort of two ways we do that. Check, more straightforward. Where's the check going? Who's it being mailed to? What do we need to include in the memo? And you need to attach something that explains what you're paying for, what we're paying for, and why we're paying that amount and to whom. So I'll give you an example about that in a second. I'll talk about the credit card first. So the other option is a credit card. If you want us to use a credit card, please write as explicit of instructions as possible. Like no stone unturned, because can be really tricky if we're making a credit card payment. We've had times when I've called places, I don't have the person's name, or I don't have the name of the person who I need to fill out the to charge the credit card, or I need an account number, or when there's actually a credit card fee if I call, and so now the amount's different, and so I don't have the documentation for it anymore, and the application doesn't match. So if credit cards are like not the preferred method, as you can tell how I'm talking about this, but if you do want us to use it, just make sure you're calling whatever the agency is that's receiving the money before and asking them, like, okay, what's this process going to look like? What information would somebody need to come calling you with so that they can make a payment on the phone? Is there a credit card fee? What do they need to be ready to say you? Can you mail them a receipt? Because we still need a receipt if we do this. So just some of those things to think about. If you can write the phone number, the agency name, the person to ask for, all that stuff there, that's really helpful. So then the last thing that's not actually part of the application, because it's something you're going to attach to it, is the proof. So if you already paid for the need, if you did this option up here, then we need receipts. Okay, so we need receipts for everything you bought. And if it's something that doesn't traditionally have a receipt, like for instance, rent, like let's say you mailed a check to a landlord, we need something to show that what you did makes sense, right? So like imagine that you're an investigator and you're like looking at all these papers and you have to make a paper trail. So what you would want is a lease probably that shows that this individual is a landlord and that they're supposed to receive $625 for 1 month's rent. And then that says that the amount you spent was $625. So it can be like a check stub. It could also potentially be a receipt. If you can get one from a landlord, that can work too. For something that you're asking for us to pay for directly, we still need proof of what we're paying for and why. So again, example, like let's say you want us to send a check to a residential program for someone who's in recovery. We need something that shows the name and address of the residential program that looks sort of legitimate, like we actually know that it's a residential service program. So it could be like a print off their website or something. And then we're also looking for you to have something that outlines the cost and the reason why we're sending them that amount. So the pre-approved limit for inpatient treatment is 1 month. So we would want something saying 1 month costs $650, and this is where you send it to. And so we can match that up to your application and say, okay, yeah, they requested $650. It says here on this letter that it's $650 for a month. That's the pre-approved limit. They want the check to be mailed to this place. That's the place that's on the website that matches with the letter. So we're like looking for a whole sort of picture of how we can track this need and document it. All right, so I think that's the basics of applying. That's a lot of information. I want to open it up to people's questions. So feel free to write something here, or if you feel more comfortable speaking your question, unmute yourself. Yes, different agencies can ask for funds for the same person. So this has already happens. We ask, again, that when you're working with someone and you're ready to apply for the fund, you ask that person if they've already applied for this fund before. So that can just help you see if that same person has used the fund for the same purpose, right? Because that's really where the limit comes in. It's not so much like, you know, one person, Mary, could apply for the fund for a different need in every program in the state and it wouldn't matter. But if Mary went to every single program and got rent, well, then that might be a little bit different, right? And so we want to be asking the client if they've already used the fund, and if they have, what they used it for. And as long as it's within the same year, if it's a different need, that person can still be pre-approved. And if not, then just reach out and say, this person already got rent at Courage Lives, but now I'm calling from Preble Street, and this is the circumstance behind them needing it again. And then we figure it out. Good question. Any other questions folks have?
And can you please, because of I was late, can you please send us this application
Say that
via
again.
email? Can you send us the application via email because I was late?
To send it to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's on our main Send website. I'll show you where it is.
Okay.
So if you, oh, I need to actually stop screen sharing and then screen share again. Let's see here. Okay, so if you go to this website, mainsend.org.
Okay.
So mainsend.org. And then you go to support, Survivor Support Fund.
Okay.
And then down at the bottom here, this will always be where the most recent application is.
Okay.
So you click here. So under Main Human Trafficking Survivors Fund, you click here, and then it opens in another form. And then you can download it from here, or you can just print it out right from the website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
My question is when it comes to what agencies are allowed to primarily apply, when and how do you know which ones are? Like what ones are eligible to apply and what ones aren't eligible to apply? Like I work for Amistad and I run a human trafficking residence. So I actually went through Survivor Speaks once to apply for this application. So how do I know when I can do it all by myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say for agencies who have never applied before, so a lot of the programs have already applied who are sort of in their realm, or are domestic violence or sexual assault programs. So all DV and SA programs can apply. Anybody who's already applied can keep applying. For new programs like Amistad, we should connect and talk more. Because I've just learned there's a process that we need to go through to make sure our funders have approved people. So if your program already gets Department of Health and Human Services money, then it may not be an issue. Do you know if Amistad's funded that way?
So I had just put myself back on mute. Yes, I am funded. I'm the director. I'm the director of our housing services. So yes, we are funded through Department of Human Services.
Great, great. And then I think that you should be all set to apply. And I know that you guys do have a trafficking specific program. You're connected with your MVP. You're obviously connected with Survivor Speak. So you guys can apply directly. And if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk more.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I see a question here. I'm running into a lot of educational needs, help paying for books or classes. A lot of these people don't have resources because they don't have educational background because they were trafficked and not able to complete school. Are there other resources that you know of that may be able to help with these needs if it's not something covered by the STEM fund? Unfortunately, I don't right now. This is something I've noticed a lot, that there have been requests for things that are really important, but just aren't quite how VOCA would define an emergency need or an urgent need. And so I don't have any ideas, but maybe some other people in this group do, of where people could go for that. Good question. And saying that, I'll also say, I'm sort of logging all this into my mind. So later, if there's opportunities to try to get more funding for stuff like that, I'm sort of trying to remember and keep that in my mind. Yeah, someone suggested maybe an adult education program. Yeah, it's a good idea. Any other questions folks have about the fund? Hypotheticals are welcome. All right. Well, then I think we'll probably sign off early. So again, if you have any questions about the fund, feel free to email htfund@micasa.org. I just realized that I never introduced myself at the beginning of this, so very belatedly, hello, I'm Jess. And you can always email me directly at jess@micasa.org, jess@mecasa.org. We only use the HT Fund address because sometimes I go on vacation or I'm out sick, and so if we use that address to send in applications and questions, we'll be sure that someone will always be able to get back to you. But as a rule, it's usually me who's responding to those. So you'll see that you'll email HT Fund and then it'll be me who responds. So feel free to reach out to either of those accounts if you have questions. And I'm so glad that you all could join us today. Hopefully this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube page soon. So if you have other folks at your agency who you want to receive this information and they weren't able to join, I will send out something to Sten that hopefully people can push to their networks when that happens. All right. Okay, thanks for joining, everybody. Bye.